When you look at these pictures, what do you see? For me, I see a scam. I see government officials sitting on the ground like school children in the village. This is the biggest scam to ever happen in the country of Zimbabwe. Imagine you are a minister, you are educated, you have power, you serve under one of the most feared government in Africa. And yet, on a warm evening in 2007, you found yourself barefoot on a mountain in the middle of nowhere, clapping your hands like a child, watching a woman in a traditional dress, pointing a staff at a rock, and diesel fuel flows down the mountain. This actually happened in a small town in Zimbabwe, a small town called Chinoi. And the woman who made it happen was barely educated. She had never sat in a boardroom. She had never held a political office. She had no engineering degree at all. And yet she brought Zimbabwe's most powerful men, ministers, to their knees.
Pakutanga pandakabuditswa nebheo ndakanzi handidi kuonekwa nzvimbo yenhingirikini yechinoi. Zvakanzi mhepo yako inozouya yakanyadzisa hurumende. Saka handina kuziva kuti yaizonyadzisa pane zvipi.
She extracted cash, a farm, a house, and millions of Zimbabwe dollars from a desperate government at the time. And when the time came for her to face justice, she ran. For the past 6 years, we grew this platform to 179,000 subscribers, and we have evolved a lot of times. So it would mean a lot if you subscribe and like the video. It's for free. To understand what Rotina Mavunga did, you first need to understand what Zimbabwe had become by the time she arrived. Because her story does not begin with her. It begins with a nation in collapse. By 2007, Zimbabwe was experiencing one of the worst economic collapse. Fuel stations stood empty, long queues of cars stretched for kilometers, people sleeping in their vehicles overnight, just hoping that a delivery might come. Farms could not operate. So without fuel, Zimbabwe wasn't just economically broken, it was paralyzed. Rotina Mavunga was a woman who had been underestimated her entire life. She was about to make the most powerful men in Zimbabwe pay for that mistake. Now here is where the story becomes extraordinary, because what Rotina Mavunga pulled off was not just a scam. It was a carefully constructed illusion built on timing, psychology, and deep understanding of what Zimbabwe's government desperately wanted to hear. Let me walk you through exactly how she did it. In March 2007, Rotina Mavunga is walking in the bush near a mountain outside Chinoi, and she finds something, an abandoned fuel tank, just sitting there, forgotten in the bush. Then comes Rotina Mavunga. She looked at the abandoned fuel tank and sees possibilities. She fills it with diesel, she attaches a pipe to the outlet, and then, with remarkable precision, she conceals the tank inside the mountain, inside the rock, threading the pipe carefully between the rocks, hiding it from view. It was a plan, well articulated. When the pipe is activated, diesel flows down the face of the rock. To anyone watching from below, it looks like fuel is literally oozing from the stone. She then recruited people to work with her, people who will hide near the tank, out of sight, and open the valve at the right time. The illusion was ready. Now she needed an audience. Rotina Mavunga did not approach just anyone. She did not go to a journalist or a local official or a businessman. She summons a top government official. She claims she is possessed and that the ancestral spirit of one Sekurudombo has spoken to her and revealed that the mountains are filled with fuel, waiting to be unlocked for Zimbabwe's salvation. Think about the timing for a moment. Zimbabwe is in the middle of a crippling fuel crisis. The government is desperate. The people are suffering at the moment. And here is a spirit medium operating in a country where traditional beliefs carries deep cultural weight, claiming that the ancestors themselves have provided the solution. For a government that had invoked African spirits and ancestral connection as core pillars of its identity for decades, this was not just an economic claim. This was spiritual. This was ideological. And it worked. It worked. Senior government officials, cautious but curious, some skeptical but not skeptical enough to stay at home. They were led through the bush to the rock oozing diesel. And then Rotina Mavunga raises her staff like Rafiki from Lion King. She chants, she prays, she calls on Sekurudombo. Somewhere hidden from view, an accomplice reaches for a valve and diesel begins to flow. The smell of it fills the environment. The officials, one of them kneels and another reaches out and touches the fuel. Within days, the report reaches Robert Mugabe's cabinet. This is going to change our lives. Zimbabwe's fuel crisis may be over. The ancestors have provided, and Mugabe, the president of Zimbabwe, the man who had ruled this country since 1980, the man who had survived sanctions, revolution, and international condemnation. He chaired a cabinet meeting about Rotina Mavunga. He sends a high-powered task force to investigate. The task force included 3 of the most senior ministers in the Zimbabwean government by that time. This was not a junior committee. These were not minor officials. These were the men who controlled Zimbabwe's military. And they were all going to a mountain to watch a woman in traditional dress summon fuel from a rock. Now, this is the emotional centerpiece, the almost unbelievable moment. The delegation arrives at the mountain, and then photos that will later go viral, that will become symbols of this entire saga, were taken. Those photos will haunt Zimbabwe's political history for decades. The committee watches, the diesel flows, the committee reports back to President Mugabe. The verdict is official. Zimbabwe's persistent fuel shortages are at an end. But perhaps the single most audacious thing Rotina Mavunga ever did, the moment that reveals just how deeply she understood the psychology of power, was what she demanded of Mugabe himself. This was a rumor. This was a story that was told to us as people, that she declared that if the country truly wanted the diesel to flow in commercial quantities, Robert Mugabe would have to walk barefoot from Harare to the mountain. Now, that is 115 kilometers. From Harare to Chinhoyi. The 83-year-old president of Zimbabwe at that time, on foot, barefoot. That was something that was not going to happen. A second team of ministers was sent. This time, different faces, new eyes. They came, they watched, they questioned, and they began to doubt. But here's the layer of this story that most people never discuss. Because Rotina Mavunga did not act alone. When she was in court, a judge made a shocking finding. That is the time that when she was arrested. And the finding was that one of Zimbabwe's most powerful civil servants supplied Rotina Mavunga with 125 liters of diesel. His name was Tobayo Mdede, a registrar general of Zimbabwe since 1985. The man who had overseen every single election in Zimbabwe since independence. The very diesel that poured down the rock, it was his fuel. It was his contribution to the illusion. And people by now don't even understand why he did that. And when Rotina Mavunga eventually went on the run from the police, it was Mdede who hid her, who fed her, who sheltered a fraud suspect from the law. What Rotina Mavunga had created was not just an illusion of diesel. She had created an ecosystem of dependence. She wanted everyone to depend on her. The second investigation team began to ask the questions that should have been asked months earlier. Where exactly is the fuel coming from? Why does it only flow during the ceremonies? Why does it stop? The more they pressed, the more Mavunga became more defensive. And she insisted more spiritual ceremonies be done. But this time, the officials weren't clapping barefoot on the ground. This time they were looking behind the rock, and behind the rock they found a pipe. It was hidden between the rock running up to a concealed tank. Those involved were caught and arrested. At the very moment of the arrest, the diesel stopped flowing from the rock. Rotina Mavunga ran. She fled into the bush, into the network of people who had benefited from her connections, into the shelter of powerful friends. And according to the judge, she was sheltered, hidden, and fed by Tobayo Mdede while police searched for her. But they found her. They always find them. Police might look simple in the eyes, but when they are looking for you, they will find you. She was arrested, and Zimbabwe's most extraordinary fraud case was brought before the Chinhoyi Magistrate Court. But what about the people who were not ministers? Because in the community around the mountain, Rotina Mavunga had also left a trail of believers. A local elder named Tafira, who had witnessed everything from the very beginning, would later say, years after the conviction, that he still believed her, that he was there the first day she arrived in the community, that he had seen her pointing a staff at a tree and it burst into flames. Even after the pipes were found, even after the verdict, even after the prison sentence, he still believed that there was diesel in that mountain. Zimbabwe in 2007 was not just economically broken, it was spiritually desperate. And Rotina Mavunga understood the assignment, understood that desperation better than any economist, any minister, any president ever could. The case of Rotina Mavunga came before Judge Ignatius Mugabe, but there was also a second fraud charge. She had allegedly sold an 18-kilogram stone that she claimed was gold in exchange for a cow. In 2010, 3 years after the scam first unfolded, she was sentenced to 27 months in prison. Thank you guys for watching this far. I'm grateful, and make sure to subscribe and like the video if you're interested in more videos like this. I'm honestly grateful. Goodbye.